Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary is a small island located in the middle of East Francisco Bay. It was built to be America's most secure, escape-proof federal penitentiary. Alcatraz gained notoriety from its start as the toughest prison in the U.S., considered by many the world's most horrifying prison of its time. The main idea for building Alcatraz was intended for prisoners who continuously caused trouble among other federal prisoners. It would be a, quote, last resort prison, end quote, to hold the worst of the worst who had no hope for rehabilitation. On August 11, 1934, the first group of 137 prisoners traveled by rail to St. Bernardino, California, and arrived at Alcatraz from the United States Penitentiary of Leavenworth, Kansas. Before being escorted to Alcatraz, they were handcuffed in high-security coaches and guarded by about 60 Federal Bureau of Investigation (FBI) special agents, U.S. Marshals, and railway security officers. Most of the prisoners were notorious bank robbers, counterfeiters, or murderers. Among the first inmates were also 14 men from McNeil Island, Washington. On August 22, 1934, 43 more prisoners arrived from Atlanta Penitentiary and 10 more from the Northeastern Penitentiary. On September 1st, one prisoner arrived from Washington Asylum and Jail and 7 from the District of Columbia Reformatory in Virginia. And on September 4th, another batch of 103 prisoners arrived by train from Leavenworth and Atlanta. Now into 1935, and by June 30th, 1935, it was the penitentiary's first anniversary. It had a population of 242 prisoners, although some inmates had already been transferred out of Alcatraz some months later. On the first anniversary, the Bureau of Prisons wrote, quote, the establishment of this institution not only provided a secure place for the detention of the more difficult types of criminal, but has had a good effect upon discipline in our other penitentiaries also. No serious disturbance of any kind have been reported during the year, end quote. On January 10, 1935, a severe storm caused a landslide on Alcatraz, causing the Model Industries building to slide. The slide prompted a series of changes to the structures on the island. A riprap was built around the Model Industries building. It was strengthened and a guard tower was added to the roof in June 1936. Also in June, the barracks building was remodeled into 11 new apartments and 9 single rooms for bachelors. By this time, 52 families were living in Alcatraz, including 126 women and children. In 1936, the problem with the Model Industries building continued. Utility problems with some of the old buildings and system led to extensive updates, including new two-proof grills on the ventilators of the cell house roof, 2 new boilers installed in the powerhouse, and a new pump for saltwater sanitation, and guardrails added to the stairways. In 1939 and 1940, a $1 million redevelopment began, including construction of the new Industries building, a complete overhaul of the powerhouse with a new diesel engine, the building of a new water tower to solve the water storage problem, new apartment blocks for officers, improvements to the dock, and the conversion of D block into isolation cells. The changes were completed in July of 1941. The workshops of New Industries building became highly productive, making Army uniforms, cargo nets, and other items in high demand during World War II. In June of 1945, it was reported that the federal penitentiaries had made 60,000 nets. Alcatraz housed notorious criminals such as Arthur R. Baker and Alvin Capras. Conspiracy to kidnap Barker with Neary Young and Rufus McLean attempted to escape on the night of January 13, 1939. Barker was shot and killed by the guards. Alphonse Al Gabriel Capone, Scarface, he served just 4.5 years of his sentence there before developing symptoms of tertiary syphilis and poor mental health before being transferred to the Federal Correction Institution at Terminal Island in Los Angeles in 1938. Rafael Cancel Miranda at Alcatraz, he was a model prisoner where he worked in the brush factory and served as an altar boy at Catholic services. George Kelly Barnes Machine Gun Kelly. Kelly was constantly boasting about several robberies and murders he had never committed. Former prisoners reported brutality and inhumane conditions, which severely tested their sanity. Ed Wook was the prisoner to commit suicide in Alcatraz. Ruth Percival chopped off his fingers after grabbing an axe from the fire truck, begging another inmate to do the same to his other hand. A writer described Alcatraz as, quote, the big garbage can of San Francisco Bay into which every federal prison dumped its most rotten apples, end quote. In 1939, the new U.S. Attorney General Frank Murphy attacked the penitentiary, saying, quote, the whole institution is conducive to psychology that builds up a sinister, ambitious attitude among prisoners, end quote. On December 3, 1940, Henry Young murdered fellow inmate Rufus McLean. Young ran downstairs from the furniture shop to the tailor shop where McCain worked. Young would end up violently stabbing McCain in the neck. McCain would die a few hours later. Young had been sent to Alcatraz for murder in 1933. He was later involved in an escape attempt, which gangster Doc Barker was shot to death. He spent nearly 22 months in solitary confinement as a result, but was eventually permitted to work in the furniture shop. Young went to trial in 1941, with his attorneys claiming that their client could not be held responsible for the murder since he had allegedly been subject to, quote, cruel and unusual punishment, end quote, by prison guards before the act. The trial brought Alcatraz into further disrepute. Young was then convicted of manslaughter, and his prison sentence was extended by a few years. By the 1950s, the conditions at Alcatraz had improved, and inmates were gradually permitted more privileges, such as playing musical instruments, watching movies on weekends, painting, and radio use. The strict code of silence became more relaxed, and prisoners were permitted to talk quietly. It was by far the most expensive prison in the United States, and many still perceived it as America's most extreme jail. In his annual report for 1952, Bureau of Prisons Director James V. Bennett called for more centralization institution to replace Alcatraz. A 1959 report indicated that the facility was over 3 times more expensive to run than the average American prison. In normal prisons, it cost $3 per prisoner per day, but at Alcatraz, it was $10 per prisoner per day. The cost problem made worse by the building's structural deterioration from the exposure to salt spray. To fix it, it would cost $5 million. In 1958, major repairs began, but by 1961, engineers considered the prison a lost cause. Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy submitted plans for a new maximum security institution at Marion, Illinois. The June 1962 escape from Alcatraz led to harsh investigations. This, combined with the major structural problems and the expensive operation, led to its closure on March 21, 1963. The final Bureau of Prisons report said of Alcatraz, quote, the institution served as an important purpose in taking the strain off the older and greatly overcrowded institutions in Atlanta, Leavenworth, and McNeil, Ireland, since it enabled us to move to the smaller, closely guarded institution for the escaped artists, the big-time racketeers, the integrate convicts, and those who needed protection from other groups, end quote. During the 29 years the prison was active, there were multiple attempts made to escape, and they claimed no prisoner successfully escaped. According to the prison's correctional officers, once the prisoners arrived at Alcatraz, their first thoughts were how to leave. A total of 36 prisoners made 14 escape attempts. 2 men tried twice to escape. 23 were caught, 6 were shot and killed during their escape attempt, 2 drowned, and at least 5 are listed as, quote, missing and presumed drowned, end quote. The first escape attempt was made on April 27, 1936. The prisoner involved was Joseph Bowers, who was assigned to burn trash at the incinerator. He was scaling a chain link fence at the edge of the island when he was noticed. When he refused orders of the correctional officer that was located at the West Round Guard Tower to come down, he was shot. He was seriously injured in the fall from over 15 feet and ended up dying. The second attempt was on December 16, 1937, involving Theodore Cole and Ralph Rowe. During their work assignment in one of the workshops, they cut a They cut the flat iron bars of the window and climbed into the bay. The weather on this day was rough. It was a stormy day and the sea was rough. Though they were never found, the prison authorities presumed them as dead, assuming that they drowned in the bay and their bodies were swept out to sea. The most violent escape attempt occurred on May 2nd to the 4th, 1946, when a failed attempt executed by 6 prisoners led to the Battle of Alcatraz, which is also known as the Alcatraz Blastout. Bernard Coy, Joseph Crester, Sam Shockley, Clarence Carnes, Melvin Hubbard, and Martin Thompson took control of the cell house by overpowering correctional officers, and they were able to enter the weapons room, where they then demanded the keys to the outside recreation door. A quick-thinking guard named William Miller turned over all the keys but the key to the outer door, which he ended up pocketing. The prisoners' aim was to escape by boat from the dock, but when they were unable to open the outside door, they decided to battle it out. They ended up holding Miller and a second guard hostage, prompted by Shockley and Thompson. Crester shot the guards at very close range. Miller succumbed to his injuries while the second guard, Harold Stilts, was also killed at the cell house. Shockley, Thompson, and Carnes ended up returning to the cells, while Coy, Crester, and Hubbard continued with their fight. The U.S. Marines intervened and killed Coy, Crester, and Hubbard. In this quote-unquote battle, apart from the guards and prisoners killed, 17 other guards and 1 prisoner were also injured. Shockley, Thompson, and Carnes were tried for the killing of the correctional officers. Shockley and Thompson were sentenced to death in the gas chamber, which was carried out at St. Quentin in December 1948. Carnes, however, was only 19 years old. He was given a second life sentence. On June 11, 1962, Frank Norris, John Alleyne, and Clarence Anglin attempted to escape using careful planning. Behind their cells in cell block B was a 3-foot wide, unguarded utility door. They chiseled away the salt-damaged concrete from around an air vent leading to this corridor, using tools such as a metal spoon soldered with silver from a dime, and an electric drill improvised from a stolen vacuum cleaner motor. The noise was hidden behind the accordions playing during music hour, and the progress was concealed by false walls which, in the dark cavities of the cells, fooled the guards. The prison initially had a staff of 155, including the first warden, James A. Johnson, and associate warden, Cecil J. Shuttleworth, both considered to be quote-unquote iron men. None of the staff were trained in rehabilitation, but were highly trained in security. The guards typically worked 40 hours weeks, with 5 8-hour shifts. That is enough history of Alcatraz. Let's talk about legend and the paranormal. Indigenous Americans known as On Loan were the earliest known inhabitants of Alcatraz Island. In Miwok mythology, evil spirits were said to inhabit the island. In pop culture, Alcatraz has been listed as among the top 5 alleged quote-unquote haunted spots in California. It is said that many of the ghosts that are at Alcatraz are the prisoners who weren't able to move on from Alcatraz to the afterlife. A park ranger claimed that he has heard banjo music coming from an old shower room, but when they looked, they found nothing. But the only inmate who was given the freedom to play his banjo in the shower was Al Capone. During his time at Alcatraz, his mental state deteriorated significantly. In his final years on the island, he was suffering from syphilis-induced dementia. He would spend hours strumming a banjo in the shower room, the only place where music practice was permitted. Today, visitors and staff regularly report banjo music. The melody is always the same, a simple, repetitive tune that stops abruptly when anyone approaches. No source of the music has ever been found. Capone's presence has also been reported in the hospital wards, where he spent most of his final time on the island, and in his cell in Block B. When visitors enter his cell, they report feeling a hostile presence, as if someone resents their intrusion. Photographs that were taken of the cell sometimes show unexplained shadows or mists that weren't visible to the naked eye. A tour guide who worked at Alcatraz for over a decade shared, quote, Capone's cell is always colder than the ones around it. There's no reason for it. Same ventilation, same exposure, but you can feel the difference when you walk past. Some visitors have told me they feel like someone is standing right behind them when they looked into the cell. There have also been reports of many voices, screams, whistles, and clanging at our doors. There are also claims that spirits are lurking in the shadows, which were often felt, heard, and seen by staff and visitors. Several guards have some extraordinary experiences, like hearing sounds of sobbing and moaning terrible spells, something that they call, quote unquote, the thing. The thing is an entity with glowing eyes. There is an entity known as the Ghost Woman of Alcatraz. She is seen staring directly into the camera lens of a couple who had snapped the shot. D Block is the solitary confinement area of the prison. This is where most severe punishments were administered. This is where inmates lost their minds in the darkness, and this is where at least one explained death occurred. Visitors of cell 14D, which is considered to be the most haunted cell, have felt extreme coldness wrapping them as if the spirits of the dead inmates were still there. People have also reported difficulty breathing, as if the air itself is thick with malice. A night security guard in the 1970s, during the period when the island was administered by the National Park Service, had a terrifying encounter in D Block. Quote, I was making my round when I heard screaming coming from the solitary sounds. It sounded like a man being tortured. I ran towards the sound. As I got closer, it stopped. When I shined my flashlight into cell 14D, the temperature dropped so fast my breath started fogging. I saw something. I don't know how to describe it. Like a shadow, but darker. Then the darkness around it. It moved towards the door and I ran. I quit the next day, end quote. Paranormal investigators have recorded EVPs, electronic voice phenomena, and D Block that seem to capture voices saying, get out, no more, and what sounds like pleading in Spanish. This could be the voice of a Mexican inmate who died there decades ago. Numerous tourists have reported seeing a figure in the cell of C Block described as a man in prison clothes who vanished when looked at directly. One visitor, Sarah M. from Oregon, described her experience. I was taking a photo of one of the cells when I saw someone standing inside. I lowered my camera to get a better look, and there was nobody. When I looked at the photo later, you can see what looked like a man facing the wall. My husband saw the same thing, and he was standing right next to me. The ruins of the warden's house, which was destroyed by fire during the Native American occupation, are reportedly haunted by multiple entities. Visitors describe hearing music and party sounds as if a gathering is taking place in a non-existent building. Some have reported seeing lights in the windows of a house that no longer has windows or walls. The ghost of a prisoner has been seen walking the perimeter of the recreation yard, following the same path inmates walked during their limited outdoor time. He appeared as a solid figure until observers approach it, at which point he fades from view. Some believe this is the spirit of an inmate who was killed in the yard during a dispute. Visitors of the hospital area report hearing coughing, moaning, and calls for help. The area is reportedly haunted by inmates who have died of illness or injury, still suffering death as they did in life. One visitor, a nurse, described, I have worked in hospitals my whole life. I know what dying sounds like, and that's what I heard in there, someone dying. Except there was no one there. Probably the most compelling evidence comes from the children and animals visiting the islands. Dogs have been reported to refuse to enter certain areas of the cell house, backing away and whimpering. Children are presumably less likely to be influenced by the island's reputation, frequently report seeing, quote, the man in the cages, end quote, or ask their parents why the prisoners are sad. When they are asked to describe what they saw, their accounts are remarkably consistent with their parents of a 1950s era inmate. The utility corridor that runs beneath the main cell house is also an active area. This is where prisoners and guards walked to access different parts of the prison, and where some of the most violent confrontations occurred. Park rangers and maintenance workers access this corridor report constant experiences. There's a spot about halfway down where you always feel like someone is walking behind you. I've been doing this job for 7 years, and I still get goosebumps every time I pass through. We had a worker down there who heard someone whisper his name, clear as day, right in his ear. He dropped his tools and refused to go back. The original lighthouse of Alcatraz, which was one of the first in the West Coast, has its own ghost. It was reported to be the lighthouse keeper from the 1800s. Visitors of the lighthouse have seen a figure in 19th century clothing near the lighthouse, and some have photographed what would appear to be a man in the lighthouse window, even though The building is typically locked. The small morgue on Alcatraz, when it was active, would process the bodies of inmates who died on the island. It is now used for storage, but workers report feeling watched and occasionally hearing unexplained sounds. One worker discovered he was not alone. I was organizing supplies when I heard breathing behind me, heavy breathing, like someone had been running. I turned around and no one was there, but I could still hear it. I backed out of there and never went in alone again. The National Park Service offers night tours of Alcatraz, and these visits have proven to be the most likely time to encounter something unexplainable. The visits consist of fewer visitors and no sunlight to eliminate the shadows. The spirits of Alcatraz seem to emerge more freely. The night tour guides have accumulated many stories. I was leading a group through B Block when all of our flashlights flickered at the same time. Then we heard what sounded like someone running in the tier above us. There was no one up there. I had checked before we started. A woman on my tour started crying uncontrollably in front of one of the cells. She said she felt overwhelming grief, as if someone had just told her the worst news of her life. She had no history of panic attacks or emotional problems. When she calmed down, she said it felt like it wasn't her own emotion, like she was feeling someone else's pain. I've seen cell doors move on their own, just slightly, but not to make a sound. The cells are locked. They shouldn't move at all, but they do, and it's always the same cells. Photos taken during night tours have frequently captured anomalies, orbs, mist, and sometimes what appears to be figures that weren't visible to the naked eye. While skeptics often dismiss the orbs as dust particles, some of the images are hard to explain. The images showing humanoid shapes and location where no tomb members were standing. Alcatraz has been investigated by numerous paranormal research groups and have been featured on several ghost hunting television programs. The evidence collected has been compelling. Electric voice phenomena captured at Alcatraz include what sounds like doors slamming, men arguing, and in one famous recording, a voice clearly saying, "Get out," in the solitary confinement area. Audio experts have analyzed these recordings and confirmed that the sounds do not match any known ambient noises or equipment artifacts. Investigators using thermal cameras have documented cold spots that move through the cell house in patterns inconsistent with air circulation. In some cases, these cold spots appear to take human form, moving from cell to cell as if conducting rounds. Electromagnetic field detectors constantly register spikes in areas associated with violence and death. D Block produces the highest readings, particularly around cell 14D. Investigators note that these readings often occur simultaneously with subjective experiences of discomfort or fear. Investigators have recorded responses to questions about the prison history. When asked, "Are you a prisoner?" responses have included "yes," "forever," and "can't leave." Professional investigators have captured images of apparent apparitions in the cell house. The most famous shows what appears to be a man standing in a cell that was documented as empty both before and after the photograph was taken. Analysis ruled out double exposure, lens flare, and other conventional explanations. Multiple investigators have documented objects moving on their own, including cell doors shifting in their frame and small items like pebbles being thrown by unseen hands. During one televised investigation, a heavy metal object blew across a corridor in view of multiple cameras. Skeptics point out that Alcatraz, being surrounded by water and built on rock, has unique acoustic and electromagnetic properties that could explain some of the phenomena. The volume and consistency of reports of diverse witnesses over many decades suggests something generally anomalous occurs on the island.